All right, so this week, make sure you get in that application activity and your cumulative wellness assignment. Next week, you have that portfolio assignment, which again, remember, is you just doing really an overview of like a job or internship or graduate school, and including your resume, and then 5 things you want to work on over the next 6 months. So pretty straightforward. Pretty much as long as you fit all 3 of those in there, then you shouldn't get anything less than a perfect score. For your final, it'll be cumulative, but only from approximately really topic 4 on. So I'm going to have much more of an emphasis on topic 7 is going to be the big emphasis. And then some on topic 6, the least amount is going to be on topics 4 and 5. It's 70 points, so I will have 35 multiple choice questions for you. We'll do it on test moz again. And I will give you a full hour and 45 minutes to do it, so you'll have a whole class period to do it. And you'll do that on your own whenever you want. Since you're only going to get one crack at it, make sure that you set aside enough time where you can devote it all to doing that. Really, you should all get hundreds on it. I noticed the majority of people who did poorly on the quiz spent the least amount of time on it. Conversely, though, the people who got hundreds also spent a very short amount of time on it. I think the average time spent on the 100% people was like 15 minutes. So either they really knew their stuff or they all cheated. I'm hoping that it's the former, not the latter. But either way, I guess we'll never know. All right, so any questions on what we're doing the rest of the year? Next week is it. Okay, so today we are getting into emotional wellness, and we're going to primarily be focusing on, like, say, stress management here. So when you first off think of stress, what kind of comes to mind?
I guess like being overwhelmed.
Okay.
Stress. Like thinking about all the stuff you have to do.
All right. How many of you would classify stress as something that is like psychological or emotional? And who doesn't think that? All right, what do you think?
Well, I know that cortisol is a hormone that produces.
That is true.
There's a lot of triggers for it.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to discuss that. So I'm just kind of asking how you categorize stress, broadly speaking. Not necessarily like the underlying cause of it.
More like a state. Physiological.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a physiological state. But it's like going back to, say, your reasons for eating. You either eat because you are hungry or you eat because you want to. That's kind of what I'm trying to draw the distinction here. So definitely all the examples you gave with your stress there really points to the emotional side of it or the psychological side of it, and that absolutely is part of it. But stress is also actual physical stress. So like if you go and you exercise, you are putting stress on your body physically. So just like there's two basic reasons why you eat, there's 2 basic ways you have stress. You have physical stress and you have psychological stress. So that's our 2 basic premises here. And both of them act on the body in similar ways. And like you were mentioning with cortisol, we'll talk about that because that's a big trigger here, or it's a big hormone responsible for this. And hopefully we'll make it through what amounts to our ABCs of stress here. All right, many more people are overwhelmed. Now, this is an older study, so if you notice, it's from like the 90s and 80s, so before you all were even born. Do any of you feel more stressed this year than you have in years past? And why?
Mainly just like having to pay for school and then having to like manage all your time and stuff on your own for the first time is like kind of got to grow up super quick, which is fine. It's just an adjustment period.
Okay, so normal college stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty, pretty expected. Who else? That's not just from normal college stuff. Yeah.
Just like all the code and stuff.
Well, yeah, absolutely. What's especially scary about COVID is that, I'm going to group myself in with you, that our age group is getting like seriously ill and dying of it. If you think of like the traditional like flu, it primarily, it affects everyone, but primarily the worst outcomes are from the very young, the very old, and people who have compromised immune systems. We're seeing with COVID that that's not really the case. Like perfectly healthy people are having real terrible complications and potentially dying from it. It makes it a little bit more stressful, especially, you have to go around wearing a mask everywhere now. I mean, the way you interact with people is completely different, this year than you probably have ever done in your life. I look at like my kid and I can tell he is not getting like the social skills that he should be developing because he's staying at home every day and he's not seeing anyone. I mean, outside of, me and his mom kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting. There'll be I'm sure some really good studies on pediatrics coming out in the years to come about how the current crop of like, say, 0 to 3-year-olds, how they're potentially lagging behind in social ineptness or whatever. Because right now, if I do something my kid likes, he's super happy, laughing and all that. The minute I stop, it's a complete and absolute like breakdown, complete temper tantrum and whatnot. So we'll see how, things go with that. But what's the alternative? Well, I can send him to daycare. But first off, fiscally, that doesn't seem the most responsible thing to do since I'm mostly at home. So not really the best of ideas to send your kid to daycare when you're at home, even though, still working remotely. But also, you have to look at what's his potential to become infected. Now, granted, the very young kids are, for the most part, having the least bothersome symptoms, which are good. But at the same time, you don't want to risk it. And I also don't want to catch it myself from him because knowing my luck, I'm going to be the one that goes out. So definitely stress levels much higher. Really, before the start of the semester, I was especially worried about coming back to school just because I was going to have to, be around many people. And I've gotten a little better with, managing anxiety from that. Obviously I'm here and talking to you, not, crying in a corner or anything. But still, I think we would all agree that this kind of year is not something any of us would have really ever expected. This is kind of like a video game or a movie scenario playing out. What's that game where you try to kill the world? Is that it? You try to you make like some sort of pathogen?
Yeah.
And then you power it up and whatnot. And yeah. That's what it kind of seems like, right? Normally, you know, if especially like for any of you, if you're freshmen, you would be having these normal kind of stressors of, you know, moving away from home or moving into a dorm, whatever, you know, being largely independent, all the normal stuff you would think of with stress at that age, not, you know, am I going to catch COVID and die kind of thing. So hopefully this is over soon. You have to think sometime it will. Either that or it's going to just wipe out the human race. All right, we're going to come back to the ABCs here in a second. I want to first start off on these two different perspectives that you may want to kind of keep in the back of your mind when it comes to stress. In terms of how you view or should view physiological stress, it comes in the form of what's called general adaptation syndrome. So all the exercise science people will definitely see this again at some point in your lives. But there's four different components to this. You have an alarm phase, you have a resistance phase, you have a decomposition or decompensation or a fatigue phase, and then you have a supercompensation phase. What's happening here is that this, for all intents and purposes, is your baseline. Let's say you're doing something like exercising. Well, you start exercising, things are all right. You keep exercising and you start getting fatigued. Think about like if you run like a single sprint. You know, if you run a single sprint, your heart rate goes up really fast, you start breathing heavier, but it's not going to fatigue you to the point where you can't do it again, unless you're, you know, severely deconditioned, that kind of thing. You can get back up on the line and sprint again. So that initial alarm phase is when you do like that first sprint. You are getting that initial stressor exposed to you. Your resistance here is then you working through it. So you're finishing out the workout or whatnot. I don't like the use of overtraining here because the better word to use is super compensation. Hopefully you can read that. Yep, super compensation, that's what that says. And this is where you'll see kind of a make it or break it kind of moment. The only time you truly make physiological advances to your body in response to physical training is when you rest. Anytime you're actually exercising, you're just breaking your body down. I mean, do any of you feel, you know, essentially more energetic and stronger after you're done with a heavy workout? No, you're fatigued. You've just taxed yourself doing all that. So all exercise does, and all physical activity for that matter does, is just break you down, which is perfectly normal. You need to be broken down before your body builds itself back up. So you give yourself appropriate rest, and that's where you get this supercompensation, where now my baseline is potentially all the way up here, and these are what we would call adaptations. This here, that gain you make there. If you were, though, to say continue training and not give yourself time to rest, that's where you'd see this overtraining, or what this would be. Sorry, I just can't do this anymore. This would be exhaustion. If you're overtraining, you're essentially breaking your body down faster than what you can repair. So with continued training, you actually get a worse response. You actually get like weaker, lower your VO2 max, everything worse, your opposite you would think that you get from, like, say, exercise. This is why for most all training protocols, you should be getting a full rest day at least once a week. And it's also why for like, say, you know, NCAA sports, you have to get a rest day once a week. Now, there's always obviously ways to like kind of get around that for coaches, such as, oh, maybe you all should meet at the gym today to go and lift on your own kind of thing, because every one of us knows that voluntary is anything but. But yeah, you're only supposed to do 20 hours a week. In the NBA, the term that got popularized a year or two ago was load management, where players would take a game or two off throughout the season to allow their body some rest and recovery time. Because in any professional sport, what really matters about the game? Well, I mean, yeah, but, or I should say about the season. Yeah. Do you win a championship during the regular season? No. Just ask the 2007 New England Patriots, who went 16-0. This is where, if any of you remember Allen Iverson's famous news conference where he was questioning about practice, talking about practice here. Whenever you are in a long season, your body's going to just break down throughout the course of the season. By giving yourself intermittent rest periods, you help to reduce or stave off big drops in performance and also improve your overall body's health or resistance to injury, which is definitely a good thing. But key is you only experience this as a result of rest. That's the only way you're going to actually get to that point. If you don't rest, you're going to just continually break your body down. Now, why that happens, we'll see here, is this. So this is my cortisol feedback loop. You have a number of different like hormones that regulate stress. Cortisol is the biggest one. So whenever you think of stress, cortisol is the hormone that typically comes to mind. Any of you know what cortisol does off the top of your head?
Doesn't it have like a direct correlation with testosterone for men?
Actually, yes, it does. If you notice here at the bottom, you see it says cortisol and androgens. Androgens are going to be essentially steroid type hormones. So if cortisol increases, then you will see your immune system decrease, metabolism increase, blood glucose increase, short-term memory increase, stress increase. You look at this and I don't know, cortisol seems like kind of a good thing. Now, here's why it's a feedback loop. There's 3 hormones that interact with cortisol. Well, two that interact with it and then cortisol. So 3 total hormones. Your hypothalamus is the pretty much very center of your brain. So if you were to like mark like kind of just behind your ear, but straight in the middle of your brain, it looks like a little walnut kind of shaped thing. That's your hypothalamus. Primarily, that's responsible for 2 things. It is going to synthesize tropic hormones. Tropic hormones are going to be hormones that act on other hormones. And it's going to be responsible for taking short-term memories and converting them into long-term memories. If you injure your hypothalamus, typically the hormone production response part of it isn't really affected. You have to, like, if you damage it to the point where it was, you're pretty much a vegetable. But if you were to damage that, more realistically, what would happen is you'd be living in a 51st dates kind of life, because you wouldn't be able to take short-term memories and convert them to long-term memories. That could be kind of weird if it was Groundhog Day every day kind of thing. So what the hypothalamus is releasing is this here, corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. Every time you have a hormone, you have to have a releasing hormone to release it. So you take something like HGH, or human growth hormone. To get that to actually be produced, you have to have human growth hormone releasing hormone. For something like, say, human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, you need to have a human chorionic gonadotropin releasing hormone to get that to be produced and released. So releasing hormones do nothing except act on another endocrine system gland to release another hormone. In this case, this is being released by the hypothalamus, and it goes to your anterior pituitary to release this guy here, Adrenocorticotropic Hormone, or Adrenocorticotropic Hormone, ACTH. Tropic, if you ever see a suffix saying tropic, you are typically dealing with a hormone that acts on other hormones. So specifically, this is only going to affect another part of your endocrine system. Your endocrine system is a series of glands that are responsible for like really all of your hormone production. Your anterior pituitary is kind of, your anterior pituitary is the size of a pea, so it's this big, but it's responsible for like all of the major hormones you produce outside of like your thyroid hormones, which come from your thyroid, adrenaline or other catecholamines, which come from your adrenal glands, and things like your sex hormones, which come from your gonads. So this only acts on your adrenal glands, and it only acts on your adrenal glands to produce cortisol and androgens. Androgens are another steroid-based hormone. Don't worry so much about that. We're much more concerned about the cortisol. In a normal scenario, if you're under stress, so let's say you're working out, you're doing any sort of exercise, you're under physical stress. Eventually, what happens to you? I guess theoretically, unless you're at like a 24-hour gym. You will stop exercising, right? And what does that mean for your stress levels? Goes down. Why? Yeah, the stressor is no longer present. So, one of the things that's going to happen here is if you're exercising, during the exercise, you get cortisol being released. Primarily, it's being released to increase your blood glucose because you're going to be burning a lot of carbs. So I need to increase blood glucose to make sure that I replenish that or keep my blood glucose levels stabilized. So, I don't go into, say, like a diabetic coma or something like that. Kind of terrible if that happened. After you're done exercising, cortisol typically dissipates. Well, what happens if it doesn't, though? Normally after, like I said, after the stressor is gone, the cortisol will start going away. It will return to normal levels. But if it doesn't do that, what you'll see is that the more cortisol you have will feed back into this ACTH to then make you give or produce more cortisol. So you'll actually see, and then it can also go in a separate route back up to the beginning to produce more of the releasing hormone as well. So you see how this can be a very vicious cycle. More cortisol means you produce more cortisol stimulating hormones, which means you produce more cortisol, and you keep going in this loop. If you were to do that, and not ever be able to exit that loop, what do you think your life would be like?
Super stressful.
Yeah, very stressful. And how do you feel when you're super stressed out? Not really, right? Some stress is good. Too much stress is really bad. Also, too little stress is very bad too. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. The term we'll see is called eustress, EU stress. That's like the Goldilocks zone. So not too hot, not too cold, just right. So that's your just right amount of stress. This is one of the primary reasons why people have depression. When you have cortisol in high concentrations, it suppresses your body's ability to produce serotonin and dopamine, or your natural antidepressants. Specifically, serotonin is a major one. So this is why that if you are in a bout of depression, or if someone is, like say, clinically depressed and is symptomatic, it can be very, very difficult to get out of that because your body is in a cycle that's very difficult to break once you kind of get into it. So see how that can be problematic. Other things that can happen. Well, your immune system is going to go down. This is very good if you have an autoimmune disorder. So like if you had like psoriasis or even eczema, dermatitis, something like even Crohn's disease, or you had psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, any kind of autoimmune disorder where your body attacks itself, this means you have an overactive immune system. So cortisol is used in many treatments for a lot of these because it suppresses your immune system. That's great if your immune system's overactive. Not so great if you're just a regular person and, oh, I don't know, you come in contact with a virus. At that point, you want your system to be up and going, right? So you can essentially make yourself sick by being under high levels of stress. Additionally, what will happen to, like, say, your GI system is that you can get, like, say, ulcers in like your esophagus or your stomach. So you can actually form stress ulcers from being too stressed. Now, I told you here, the short-term memory is going to go up because whenever you get this feedback loop here, where it goes and backs and acts on the hypothalamus, anytime cortisol interacts with the hypothalamus, it promotes short-term memory improvement. The downside of that is that if you have prolonged interactions of cortisol with the hypothalamus, it'll actually damage the hypothalamus. So actually can end up making your short-term memory worse in the long term, if that makes sense. The one thing that I keep going back to for virtually anything related to anything with health is moderation. Everything in moderation. I know it feels like a cop-out, but it's really how it is. Our body stays highly regulated in homeostasis in a very narrow path. You don't veer way out of there. You know, when you see a homeostasis diagram, it's always a wave. Well, it's not like you're getting, you know, these tidal wave kind of things. It's very, very close to baseline. You don't ever go way out one way or another. If you do that, you have to put yourself through a lot of stress to do it. You have to really force yourself out of what your set point is. So how do we actually get out of this feedback loop? If you have any sort of, like, say, higher levels of innate stress, anxiety, depression, it might be something that you need some sort of chemical interference with. some sort of like maybe an antidepressant medication or some other medication. Things like, you know, therapy also help. You may be unable to get yourself out of that because of your emotional state. For most people, what you do is you essentially relax your body to get at, once the stressor is gone, to remove yourself from the feedback cycle. It's like after you exercise, you know, you go and like maybe take a shower or something, but are you immediately exercising and then going and doing some sort of other taxing physical activity? Probably not. You go and like say you relax or you just recover kind of thing. Doing that is actually really important for reducing that cortisol, those cortisol levels, and getting out of this feedback loop. So again, this is why not only like say rest and relaxation and actual like say things like sleep are so important, is because primarily you need to get your body out of this feedback loop. In the short term, this is really good. In the long term, this is really bad. It's kind of like if you talk about like C-reactive protein, which is an inflammation marker. If you have C-reactive protein, it's the biggest indicator you have of future cardiovascular disease. If you like say roll an ankle and your ankle swells up, that's a time when inflammation is really good because you want your body to become inflamed to prevent further injury. When you're not injured and you have inflammation going on throughout your body or chronic inflammation, that's really bad because you're not trying to heal yourself from an injury. Does this all kind of make sense, or am I just kind of rambling here?
So like after you work out and you do something that's like relaxing, then it gets out of the
Yeah. So if you really want to like maximize like your best bang for your buck with like working out, you should work out and study at the same time. But the caveat there is that you have to be able to then have a good night's rest afterward, and you can't drink any alcohol. So if you're willing to do that, all right, our ABCs here. A is activation, B is beliefs, C is consequences. Activation is just the actual stressor itself. So this is probably the most, you know, self-explanatory thing ever. The A part is just whatever stresses you out. Now, what I do want to kind of comment on here is really thoughts and emotions. I would argue that no one can cause emotions within you. Only you bring about emotions within yourself. Now, if I like hit you, I mean, you're going to definitely have a pain reaction. That's an autonomic response. But if I were to, I don't know, call you names or make fun of you or whatever, the only emotional response that exists is the one that happens within yourself. I don't throw out hormones at you kind of thing. I mean, I guess technically if I did that, then yeah, I could affect your emotions. But your emotions only happen from within yourself. It doesn't mean to say that, you know, someone else's actions can't have an impact on you, but just kind of keep in the back of your mind that any emotional response has to completely originate from within you. So kind of just keep that in mind. And then we'll look here at this next one, are these beliefs. Beliefs are perceptions. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase perception is reality. This is where virtually everything becomes subjective. So if you're within, like, say, your group of friends and everyone is, whatever, making fun of each other, whatever, doing the normal, banter kind of stuff, that may be perfectly acceptable for your group of friends. Everyone is perfectly fine with it in that group. But if you say, maybe use that same kind of language, kind of for lack of a better word, or banter, with somebody who's not used to that, you can see how that could potentially rub them the wrong way. So your belief system or your perceptions of virtually everything, stress included, is all subjective. One person's stress levels may be, extreme panic attack for someone and virtually nothing for someone else. So there's no real right or wrong way to approach it. You should just remember that your stress levels are independent and subjective only to you. However you perceive your stress is what your stress is. That's why I say that only you can actually originate your emotions. It's because you solely determine what and how much of that emotional response you have. If you say got inconvenienced by, I don't know, Starbucks was closed today and you were waiting in line for it, that might give you, a response where, yeah, it's upsetting, but largely speaking, is that going to ruin your day? Versus if you, I was reading this story today about a girl who saw her boyfriend's Starbucks cup and it had another girl's name written on it. That might make a much bigger response for you there. So again, perceptions are reality. So everything is subjective here. So while we have all this stuff up here, so first off, how many legs does this elephant have?
One. It's a trick question.
Yeah, 5 there. Our minds want to say, though, that there's only 4 because that's what you've essentially trained yourself to believe, that you see an animal, an elephant for this matter, inherently you know that elephants have 4 legs. So picking up on that 5th leg can be very challenging. These ones here, do you see the cup or do you see the faces? Do you see the woman's face here, the younger woman's face, or do you see the older lady? So the older lady is, here's her, this is the nose, here's her mouth, this is her eyelid, this is her babushka. You seeing it now? All right, is that gold or blue?
Gold and white.
It's our eyes. Our eyes are different. Some people see it different.
Well, clearly, that's why you have these things.
Yeah.
Well,
My eyes.
when I first pulled this up, and I looked at it on my screen, it looked gold. But then when I looked at yours, now it looks blue.
It's just whatever word you focus on.
Yanni or Laurel?
Yanni. Yanni. Yanni.
How does anybody hear Laurel out of that?
Yanni. Yanni. Yanni.
How does any?
What are you guys hearing?
The first, so it played 3 times. The first time I heard Yanni, the rest I heard Laurel. Now I can't hear Yanni.
I can only hear Yanni.
Same.
If you focus on the word
Yanni.
Oh.
Yanni. Yanni.
How does anybody hear Laurel out of that? We're going to discuss. I had one. The answer is so important to so many of us who are watching.
I can't hear Laurel. So that is like, to me, that's Yanni. But again, you see how our perceptions are reality here, right? So what your belief system says in terms of stress is how your response is, or your perceptions of your stress, and then what kind of initial response you're going to give yourself. Have you ever done any of these things where you do, say, like an all or nothing attitude? Yeah, definitely. Students are the worst about this. Because I didn't get an A on the test, so it's like I failed. Well, no, you didn't. You got what you got. And if that's the worst thing that happens to you, your life's gonna be pretty damn good. So having the all or nothing mentality, or this whole like the mental filtering or dwelling on the negative, you know, that is like Bill Belichick in a nutshell right there. Because it doesn't matter if the Patriots won 45-0, he's still going to come out in his press conference and talk about how terrible his team played. I would argue that that's obviously his style of coaching, but it'll wear on you eventually. One of the things that I discussed with, say, like psychological components of eating was cognitive restructuring. And I should have put that in here, but I'll pull this up real quick. All right. So this is kind of, hopefully you can kind of see that. It's kind of a poor picture. Oh, here we go. This is what cognitive restructuring looks like. It says that you have a continuous feedback system between your thoughts, your behaviors, and your emotions. Your thoughts are just obviously whatever thought you put in your mind. I'm sure my girlfriend is cheating on me. What emotion that elicits from you? Well, now I have anger, or now I have anxiety, now I have stress. And then what's your behavior? Well, I'm going to confront her, or I'm going to leave her, or whatever. See how thoughts affect emotions, affect behaviors. And then why it's a cycle. And again, like I'm just using this, the breakup scenario. If a significant other cheated on you, what would your ongoing thoughts be about them in the long term?
They're a terrible person.
Bad, let's say. And even, you know, potentially years down the road, you could have an emotional response from that because you associate that thought with a given emotion. See how that all kind of works? Better would be to, and I know easier said than done, is to focus on the positive. So if you're able to focus on positive stuff, that's where you can make really a positive physiological change for you without doing a whole lot. There's like I go to Fired Pie up at Deer Valley all the time. Well, I say that all the time, like probably like, I don't know, twice a month. And they have the same manager that I swear works there like 24/7. And I want to hate him so much because he's the guy that, like, he's doing everything in the whole store. Like, he'll go on the line, he'll do checkouts, he'll, you know, clean, he'll whatever, make the pizzas himself, does it all. And he has just an unabashed, like, positive personality. It's like one of those things where you just want to hate that kind of thing because he's so positive all the time, but you can't because he is so infectiously positive. If you're even faking it, having a smile on your face is going to really inevitably create a happy thought process with you. If you think negative thoughts, or if you go around scowling, it's very easy to have negative thoughts, negative actions. But, you know, I'd encourage you to try it sometime. Go around just like smiling all day. I mean, I know it's not the easiest with the mask on now, but if you're able to just smile all day, see how that, like at the end of the day, how you feel just emotionally in general. Even if it's like a terrible day, just force yourself to smile like for a whole day and then just see what happens. Most likely, you will feel at least somewhat uplifted from it. Whereas if you take something bad and you feed into that bad thing, it makes it worse. You take something bad and put positivity into it, it makes it less bad, kind of thing. I know this seems to be very kind of, you know, kumbaya stuff, but it is the whole kind of underlying premise of all this. And, oh, there we go, cognitive restructuring. All right, and then consequences. Consequences are just what, like, really the behaviors that happen as a response to your stress. Now, your behavioral response to stress is really kind of an evolutionary trait. Have any of you ever, or any of you think that you are good multitaskers? I mean, at least you're being honest with yourself. Does anyone actually think they're good at it? Okay. So you are going to come be my friend here, so come on up. Yeah, you raised your hand. I'd like to play a game. All right. So you are going to play a game here.
Okay.
This is a multitask switching game. So you're going to come up here.
Oh my.
And when you click yes, you're ready to play, it'll give you instructions. And it's
Okay.
just a yes or no button that you're going to click.
Okay. Wait. Which question do I answer? Oh. What? Oh no. What? I don't know what's going on.
Oh, no.
I don't know what's going on.
All right. Oh,
Oh.
what'd you do? All right, 65,
Pretty good.
right? All right, let's do one more time here.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Less than 5. Okay. No. Yes. Yeah, crap. No. No. Yes.
All right, how we do? Oh, not bad. Pretty good improvement there.
Thank you.
So well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you notice, the square is filled up to here, kind of low on the totem pole there. But this goes to show you that we are really not meant to be multitaskers. What you're actually doing when you multitask is a concept called task switching. It's like, have any of you, well, I feel like I don't even have to ask it, but do any of you ever like play on your phones while you watch TV? And how much attention do you give to both things? I mean, you really can't give 100% of your attention to both things. But what the switch part of it is that you can go from one to the other seamlessly. You know, you can look at the TV or put your attention towards the TV and get at least be pretty well caught up with what's going on with the show. You're most likely going to miss like specific words and phrases, and then you can seamlessly switch back to your phone. Have you ever tried to watch like a TV show, especially like completely without a phone, uninterrupted? It's pretty eye-opening. I realized how much I actually hate Bob's Burgers now that I actually watched it for real. What multitasking is good for is survival. So if you were like, say, a gazelle on the prairie in whatever sub-Saharan Africa, multitasking is absolutely beneficial for you. Because have you ever seen like wild animals and, I don't know, you rustle a leaf 10 miles away and they scare off? That is all a protective trait or an evolutionary trait for them of actual multitasking. You have to go, like something that makes animals very vulnerable is drinking. They have to be able to drink and get, their sustenance while also being able to perceive the whole environment. What do you think their stress levels are like? Wild animal stress levels are freaking through the roof because they always have to be concerned about, getting eaten. Unless, you're an apex predator, then usually stress is somewhat minimal. Usually, a tiger or a lion doesn't have a whole lot to worry about in terms of like, oh, someone's going to try to eat me. I guess if you learned of poachers, but that's more of an added kind of component there. So you see how your fight or flight response is triggered by high levels of stress. Very good when you're an animal, because how much executive functioning do animals have to have? Does an animal need to know how to drive a car, to read, to write? Be pretty damn impressive if they could. No, they don't have to do that, which is why they can have much more attention devoted to having high stress levels. They need that because they need to constantly be on alert because their life is potentially always in danger. Whenever you have a fight or flight response, you are getting a dose of adrenaline. So your catecholamines or epinephrine and norepinephrine are released in high levels. You have a fight or flight high stress level environment. This is all part of your autonomic nervous system, so happens automatically. You have a sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, fight or flight. Parasympathetic, Well, the PC term is rest and digest, but food and sex is the other one you would look at. How many times are you in, like, say, a high-speed chase and you feel like hungry? Like, have you ever been like sprinting and been like, man, I could really go for a sandwich right now? Why not?
Yeah.
It's primarily, and it's also the same reason why, like, if you're exercising, you typically don't need to go to the bathroom. It's because when your body is under physical stress, it turns off other areas that aren't beneficial to it. This is the whole premise behind why you shouldn't, like, go swimming after eating, because if you try to do physical exertion, you are putting more of your nutrients and blood towards, like, skeletal muscle away from your digestive system, meaning you can get like cramps or GI discomfort potentially. That's why you do things like that. In both cases, what you're just seeing here is how our body naturally responds to stress. If you are a stressful eater, for example, obviously you're not in a fight or flight kind of response if you're stress eating, but what's happening when you're stress eating?
You're only thinking about eating.
And what does that actually do to you?
Makes you want to eat more.
Kind of. I mean, you eat because you're stressed.
Does it calm me down?
Yeah. Exactly. You eat because you're stressed, and the food then helps to relieve your stress. However, you see how that again brings that feedback cycle, because now then you get stressed because you eat, but you eat more because it reduces your stress. So vicious circle there. But you see how both the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, your fight or flight, rest or digest, they both are ways we compensate for stress, but in terms of, like, say, energy needs, how they're completely different. This gets into really this concept of, say, eustress. If you've ever been, let's say, have any of you like had a job you just absolutely hated? And how long did you stay at those jobs?
Couple months, a year.
All right, and what were your stress levels like when you were working?
They weren't that high, I just didn't like it.
Well, even if your perception of stress isn't high, you still are going to have a stressful physiological response. Now, again, that's where I go back to someone's panic attack can be another person's easygoing. But if you're in any situation you don't like, you're going to raise your cortisol levels just because your body is going to naturally respond to the stress. Now, the degree at which it does that is, again, based on your own subjective perceptions there. How many of you ever felt burnt out before?
I feel burnt out right now.
I mean, it's the end of the semester, right? It's about time. And of course, you have finals at the end of the semester, which is the absolute perfect time to have, a, major assignment kind of thing. When, the weight of the world is kind of on you. And, let's just throw some even more on you there. That's why I always think that you should have, like, your major assignments or your, like, core assessments done like 2 to 3 weeks before the end of the semester. And ideally you would do a scaffolding technique, meaning you would complete them in parts. So it's not as though, like, the day before you have to do the entire 20-page paper kind of thing. But that's just my thoughts. What do I know? So you see how way too much stress causes burnout. That's why you pretty much need to have a winter break And that's why, for the most part, schools have usually breaks in the middle of semesters. You usually have a fall break. You usually have a spring break. I don't know how well that's going to work this year, but it's to help to essentially de-stress. Now, let's go on the other end of this. Imagine on day one here, I told you all that regardless of what you've done in the past or what you are going to do in the future, every single one of you has an A for this class. Final grade is an A. Doesn't matter what you do. Do your work or don't, show up or don't. Either way, your final grade is an A. How many of you would still show up to class? Why wouldn't you come be my friends? I feel so sad now. No, but why wouldn't you come?
It's extra work that's unnecessary.
Yeah, it's extra work that doesn't matter. Imagine you were a billionaire, whatever, or you had so much money that you could never possibly run out. There is no scenario in which you would ever run out of money in your lifetime. Would you first off go to college? I could see one way or another why you may or may not. You know, if you really wanted to do something, like, or if you really wanted to study something, if you played a sport, okay, I can get behind that. You know, if you just want to have the college experience, okay. Now let's say you get whatever degree you get. Would you go pursue an entry-level position in that field? Why not?
You're just gonna make a little amount of money.
Yeah. It's an inconsequential amount of money. Let's say you're making even like say $50,000 a year. It's a pretty good salary, especially for a new grad in most fields. If you're a billionaire, $50,000 means absolutely jack shit to you. How much money does it take for you to stop and pick it up from the ground?
Too much. $1.
$1?
Think of $1. A quarter. Yeah.
Hell, I'm picking up anything, like pennies, nickels, dimes, whatever. I'll take it all. I really thought like roughly like 8 years ago, I found a $5 in a QT parking lot, and it was the same day that the Powerball was at like $1 billion. And I was like, here it is, I just won. Nope, did not, clearly. Side note, I do make the deal with all my classes if I ever do win the Powerball that I will pay for all of your tuition. But, you know, most likely in that same scenario, I'm probably not gonna be teaching here too long. So, you know, but anyway, if you had that, you know, if you had tons of money, back to the picking it up. So you take someone like say, Bill Gates or say Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, people who are hovering around that $100 billion net worth. If you or I were to pick up like say a quarter from the ground, how much do you think proportionally that would be to like say Bill Gates?
More.
By that same principle where you all think, would you all agree a quarter is worth picking up? Okay. Picking up a quarter to you would be the same thing as Bill Gates picking up roughly $45,000. So for it to be worth his time to stop and pick up money off the ground, 45 grand needs to be there. Kind of tells you something, right? So if you have more money than you know what to do with, that would lead you to not doing like say like a blue collar job. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not gonna have like, you know, find purpose in life or anything like that, but you're not going to go out of your way to do a 9-to-5 job unless it's something you absolutely just want to do, like you're driven just to do it. But at the same time, how would you like to control yourself during that? Like, so let's say that $50,000 job was your dream job. How would you approach that job though if you wanted to do it?
with happiness.
I'm thinking of like, kind of more like time management wise. I feel like I would want to come and go as I please.
But with a chip on your shoulder because you don't need it.
Yeah. Like I would only do what I want to do, which is probably not going to fly for the company, but who cares? So the point of all this is you see how a lack of stress is potentially just as bad as too much stress. Now, lack of stress, like a complete lack of stress, isn't going to have the same health effects as too much stress. But you also see how it can impact your day-to-day living. You know, potentially you could see how you could fall into, like, say, unhealthy behaviors if you had complete freedom. That's all it really, you know, money really is. Money is just freedom. Because if you have enough of it, you don't have to answer to anyone, kind of thing. That's really the only way I view money. I mean, yeah, it's obviously, you know, much more complex than that, but at the root of it all, I probably wouldn't have, like, say, a 9-to-5 job if I, you know, was wealthy or had tons of money, kind of thing. I would definitely still do this, like come and teach a class. Not a whole lot of effort I have to put into that. I wouldn't teach like 5 classes. That's way too much time. Now, are any of you athletes? What do you do? Okay, perfect. Other than this year, what are the typical crowds you would play in front of? Like how many people?
200-300.
Okay, and then how about, I don't know, like high school?
That was high school. So
Okay,
high school was about 200-300.
all right. Well, I can tell you here that it's much larger here. Unfortunately, you haven't had the opportunity to do that yet, but play with me here. What do you think your emotional state would be the first time you play in front of 5,000 people?
I would be very stressed.
Why?
A lot of people are let down when you lose or mess up in the game. Your stress would be
I mean, everyone's watching you, right? Usually, you don't see athletes go into high stressful situations and have like a perfectly average game. It's usually one of two outcomes, right? They either dominate or they fail. So you really don't see that just perfectly average kind of, you know, type of environment there. The way that you are able to use stress to really have it affect your performance, you can see can become a very, very good thing. It can make you kind of rise to the challenge, or it can make you essentially, you know, crumble and fail if you let that stress get the best of you. If the stress were to get the best of you, what kind of thoughts do you think would be going through your mind? Like during the game itself? Well, maybe. I was a collegiate baseball pitcher. So one of the things that would always be on my mind, like especially if I threw a really bad pitch, is trying to adjust it. And if I threw another bad pitch, now I start talking to myself. And now my concentration is so heavy on don't screw up that you can't help but to screw up. You know, if I tell you don't think of, you know, the pink elephant in the corner, you know, which is the first thing you're going to think of, kind of thing. It's those times when you are completely free of really self-critique that you usually have the best performance. And self-critique, not necessarily putting yourself down, but essentially overthinking your performance. For most all sports, the amount of speed that goes into the mechanics of the individual movements is too fast for you to be able to perceive in real time. The only way you'd be able to, like, say, truly break down your mechanics is to, like, videotape yourself and replay at slow speeds. So trying to, like, even work through your mechanics mid-game is something that can be very detrimental to your overall performance. Essentially, once you start overthinking things, you start overanalyzing, you start making changes where you shouldn't. So you see how that can lead to higher levels of stress. Finding that, you know, perfect amount of stress, that eustress zone, is kind of difficult. It really changes with different scenarios. You know, I think of, like, playing high school basketball, and even, like, when I was on the JV team, I hated basketball. It was one of those things that, like, my varsity coach was my grandma's next door neighbor, and my JV coach lived 3 doors down from him. So I knew them my whole life, and they were, like, great guys. But then when they were my coaches, God, I just hated them. Hated basketball, didn't ever want to play it again. The straw that really broke it was I came off the bench my sophomore year on JV and scored 16 points. And then the next day at, like, our film review, our coach was calling me lazy on defense. And then I found out I had mono. And so I was like, you know what, I'm done with this. Screw you guys, I'm going home. So yeah, that was the last straw of that. But when, you know, we would have, like, our home games, you know, JV team plays before varsity, you know, fourth quarter, we would pack the stands just incidentally. And it was kind of awe-inspiring to be playing in front of that many people. You know, I felt that I excelled more during that. I almost feel like when there was less people that there's more scrutiny on me, because now everyone has essentially laser focus on you, as opposed to when there's big crowds, you know, you have everything else in the environment taking care of that. But that's just kind of my thoughts there. Point is, you see how the perception leads into what the consequence or the actual action is with that. When you get too high levels of stress, and especially when you have difficulty getting out of that cortisol feedback loop, things that are going to happen primarily are these kinds of things here. I mean, hopefully you don't turn to, like, alcohol or drug abuse because you're stressed. You know, a stressful day at the office sure makes heroin look very attractive. But these two things especially, I mean, I know I've definitely experienced that. I mean, I have trouble sleeping as it is. So anytime I'm stressed, like, I know it's gonna be a restless night. But have you ever been, like, really tired and fatigued, and yet you still can't go to sleep? A lot of that has to do with your stress levels. Because remember, when you are stressed, your metabolism's going higher, your body is releasing different catecholamines as well, so your heart rate, blood pressure are gonna go up. Not an ideal environment to be sleeping, right? It's kind of like, too, if you've ever had, like, a nightmare and you wake up from that, you usually wake up, like, in a very heightened state of alertness. That's because you're actually releasing cortisol in your sleep in response to what you're dreaming about. So you can actually make yourself become stressed even while you're sleeping. That's kind of terrible. These two things primarily are going to be the primary symptom that you'll see from having too high levels of stress. Fatigue can be, linked to virtually everything. However, if you notice yourself having greater bouts of insomnia when there's no other apparent reason for it, usually that points to higher levels of stress. So I know I keep saying it, but kind of really to sum it up, stress is very good when it's done at an appropriate time or experienced at an appropriate time. It's very bad when it's experienced round the clock. CHD, coronary heart disease. You may see CAD, coronary artery disease. So because cortisol makes your immune system go down and it makes your blood pressure go up, that's why you're going to see problems here. What cortisol typically also will do when you're exposed to it chronically is it will release inflammatory markers, meaning that you'll have really low levels of inflammation in your body. You think of, like, say, an artery. An artery looks kind of like this. All this on the outside here is muscle. And this is the actual place where all your blood and junk should go. Well, if you have high blood pressure, what does that actually mean for your arteries? Yeah, why is that? Yeah, exactly. It's like if any of you ever played with a hose before and you put your thumb over the hose, that's what's happening when your blood pressure goes up. You are closing off part of your artery surface area, and then the pressure increases. Higher pressure can lead to things like, say, cholesterol buildup. It can lead to things like aneurysms. So you can get, and they can also have like blood clots and whatnot. All not good stuff. So if you're stressed, blood pressure goes up. It acts as a vasopressor. In other animals that don't have, say, typical like catecholamine regulation, I think like something like pigs comes to mind. Cortisol is the main trigger or main vasopressor you also will have for like something like that. But that's just some random fact for you. But higher blood pressure associated with a lot of bad stuff, particularly with your heart and your brain. Two things you don't want to really see go wrong. Just because you're stressed out doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke. But the insomnia, like if you even have one poor night of sleep, sleep deprivation can take effect after one bad night. And I'm sure all of you have been sleep deprived at some point in your lives. What was that next day like? No, not at all. A form of torture that is common for like interrogation is sleep deprivation, like keeping people up for days on end. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you weren't allowed to sleep, kind of thing? I know when I get to around the 20 to 22 hour mark, I start like hallucinating. I start definitely seeing things that aren't there. So I know that I would not like, I'm spilling all my secrets like right away. Like, I don't care, don't torture me, just I need to go take a nap kind of thing. But the sleep deprivation is the immediate problem you're going to have. That's going to give you your most acute or short-term negative health effects. All right. We have 15 minutes left. There's a whole lot of stuff here with, yeah, it was Michael Phelps. There's a whole lot of stuff here with stress management that I want to go over. However, it's going to take a little longer than 15 minutes to do it. So rather than kind of try to push this into all into like just one day here, we'll finish this up then next week. So that's everything new I have for you there. So I'll let you all go a few minutes early here. If you have any questions, I will stick around so you all leave, but if not, you are all good to go. And then I will see you all here one last time next week.